Well, thank you. It's also a great pleasure to be here. I just, people, when, when I retired, everybody said, "Oh, aren't you going to miss this?" And um, that was mostly my colleagues that were saying that. And, I could scarce control my mirth. But I do miss the students enormously. So I have really enjoyed dinner, and I'm really looking forward to a good conversation. I should tell you that this is the first time I've spoken on this subject. I have done primarily Forest Service BLM stuff and private land conservation. I have a lot to say about land trusts. But talking about food comes new to me. And I've been working on this for about 15 years, and this is my maiden voyage. So let's see if we can't wrest some truth from the bloody dialogue. The book I'm working on right now is I always work on books with graduate students, so there's a bunch of us, but the title is Indulgence or Innovation. And it basically asks the same question that the title of tonight's lecture asks. What's the relationship between yuppie lettuce and food justice? Or put another, more personal way, do I do anybody any good when I buy organic, local, artisanal, grass-fed, whatever food, or am I just indulging my personal preferences obviously for cheese and meat and, cheese and meat? Or another kind of indulgence, am I protecting my elite self from health hazards that less elite folks are subject to every day? And I will just start by saying that my political involvement in this is nonpartisan, but by no means trivial. And right before I came out here, I bought two butternut squash from a gentleman that I've known for years who sells them in the farmer's market where I live. And I paid $7 for two butternut squash. And I also paid $7 for a dozen eggs. Now, the eggs are absolutely amazing, and they'd be worth $100. I mean, they're just so wonderful. They have no hormones, the lips of the chicken have not been cut off, so they're worth it. What about the butternut squash? I mean, the soup is great, but I couldn't even tell. So what I'm trying to do is support local, organic, product. And my question is, what kind of fool am I? Is there any reason to do that? And so I'm going to try to address that here in both a sort of a quasi-scholarly and a sort of personal way. And I'm going to do that in 5 parts. And my students would already be nervous. In fact, some would already be leaving the room. I hope you all notice that I'm extremely well prepared. This weighs 45, maybe a pound, and usually I do things in 3 parts. I'm at the dangerous stage of a research project, by which I mean I've done most of the research. I haven't written anything, and so I probably haven't forgotten anything yet. So I know a lot more than I will when the book comes out, and so you're going to get the full blast. So I'm going to do 5 things. I'm going to first, as the French sociologist would say, interrogate the phrase, do I do any good? What constitutes good? What needs to be done? And I'm going to address that briefly from a consumption and a production perspective. I'm then going to try to define yuppie lettuce a little more broadly. Yuppie lettuce is a stand-in for all these artisanal blah, 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 and I'd just like to talk about that for a while. I'll then talk about why it's so hard to change the food system. I mean, I would have thought that, the heavens would have fallen the moment I paid $7 for 2 butternut squash. And in fact, a lot of us have been doing that for quite a while. And you got to ask, why haven't things changed? And finally, I'm going to go back to my title, talk a lot about food justice, because it's a topic that is rapidly emerging, and I think it's worth thinking about it in all of its variations. And then I'll conclude. And as I said, I have 360 pages of text, which I've managed to boil down into just under 4 hours of talking. I should tell you as well that I've written the speech. I've learned what I'm going to learn from it. So if you have a response, I'd rather hear that than me. I know what I'm going to say. And if you think I've screwed something up, I have to tell you, my friend Jane drove me over here, and she's been my research assistant on many projects. I had a long period in my life when I couldn't walk, and so she was always schlepping me and my suitcase on research trips. And so it was somewhat shocking to me that when we got into a bit of a tussle about this, I just want to assure you that I am not a Californian. And nothing that I say should be taken as an intellectual or verbal quirk that we so frequently and appropriately associate with Californians. I was born and raised in New York. I went to college on the East Coast. I went to graduate school on the East Coast. I had my first job in Michigan, and I am not a Californian. So we're all going to have a good time here tonight, but I just want to make very sure that if any question suggests that I have concluded in this way because I am a Californian, I just want you to know that's not right. I am from New York, and when we talk about our coffee afterwards, you'll understand that it's true. And if I'm boring you because you already know this, just give me a signal and I can speed up. I mean, I got a lot of pages here. I could skip 10 and nobody'd even know the difference. So, from what needs to be done, if I'm saying, are we doing any good, there's an implicit statement there that there's a problem. And so what needs to be done? From the consumption side, I think it's fairly clear that we are not eating well. And I'm going to discuss that in terms of what are this is sort of a coin of the realm. So if you've heard this, I could easily skip this section, but it's called the paradoxes of the Western diet. And some of it's just interesting to think about. And the first is that we, in the short span of years starting maybe when I graduated from college, maybe when I entered grade school, but in my lifetime, we have reversed the pattern of millennia. I don't mean the last century, I mean thousands of years, to the point that now rich people are thin on average and poor people are fat. And if you think about William Howard Taft, and if you think about Teddy Roosevelt, it used to be a sign of prosperity that you couldn't see your knees from the top of your face. And now that's just reversed. How did that happen? Well, the answer is partially expressed in the second paradox of the Western diet. Bad, highly processed food is cheap, and good, simple food is very, very dear. And that is not a coincidence. That is not the natural way. A lot of people spend billions of dollars every year in advertising, in political campaign contributions, in lobbying, in product development, and in synthesizing food and shipping it all around the world to make that so and to keep it so. The cheapest calories are from very basic items like flour, sugar, and oil. The next items are primarily processed snack foods, potato chips, candy, Cheetos, and crackers. The most expensive calories include all the fresh fruits and vegetables. And now there's a wonderful little thing on the web. I'm going to try to expand this conversation a little bit beyond, I mean, as everybody must have read Omnivore's Dilemma, or at least heard of Michael Pollan. I'm going to try to push the boundaries out a little bit and tell you to get on the web and look at mymoneyblog.com, and you'll get this visual on expensive versus cheap calories. 51% of our calories are from processed foods, and 7% are from fruits and vegetables. And you all know this, but I'll just remind you that French fries are a vegetable. In fact, they are the most popular vegetable in the world today. The average American person eats 2,700 calories a day. The recommended consumption, does anyone know? 1,800. So people are telling us to eat and eat more. And I'm doing just what they want me. Fresh fruits and vegetables, one of my colleagues has observed, are rapidly becoming luxury goods. Another thing you can look at if you want to get into this is you can look at the calories per penny best buy, or CPP ratio. The best calorie on the market today for getting calories for a penny are M&M's Jumbo Pack, 32 ounces at Safeway. Second, Dolly Madison chocolate ice cream, 1 quart at Pathmark. Third, a Payday bar. I think this reflects the season. 30 calories per penny. Fifth, extra chocolate Payday bar. Oh, it's more expensive, but it's also very high in cheap calories. And the last, now this one shocked me almost to death, Necco wafers. Now that's from my generation. Why does anybody under 40 know what a Necco wafer is? Oh, good for you. Good. Oh, you're not under 40. Anyway, we have a real problem. The third paradox is that we have global hunger and local hunger and ubiquitous mal and nutrition in a time and place when food is abundant. And if you want to read a book on this subject, one that will curl your hair, is Jane Poppendick's, that's Poppendiek, I spell it wrong all the time, Breadlines, Knee Deep in Wheat, and it's an introduction to the Depression era Feed the Hungry programs. She's also written one more recent called Sweet Charity, which has a, oh, thank you so much. This is not new. This is the only one that is not new. We have always had hunger, famine, and malnutrition in times of plenty. Hunger and malnutrition reflect power, political power, economic power, and distribution systems. It has shocked many people to learn I think we just had the 150th anniversary of the Irish potato famine, that exports to England from Ireland never even dipped during the potato famine. 3 million people starved to death in Ireland, and another 2 million people fled mostly to New England, actually, in the first inst. But exports to England never even declined. And Amartya Sen, S-E-N, has written a wonderful book on this general subject called Poverty and Famine, an essay on entitlement and deprivation, and demonstrates beyond cavil by reviewing centuries of famines in India that we are not having trouble with the production. I'll just give you some data that was brought to my attention by another wonderful book, Raj Patel's book, Stuffed and Starved. It's a wonderful book, but I'll just give you this data quickly. Between the 11th and 17th century, which is about 600 years, crudely speaking, which tells you all you need to know about my data analysis, there were 14 famines in a 600-year period in India. Between 1765 and 1858, which was in marketized world trade in food, started to really take root. There were 12 famines in 4 major food scarcities in India in about 100 years. And after the Indians had the full benefit of the Raj period and the British market system for distributing food in India, there were 20 famines between 1860 and 1908, which is younger than I am. So that needs to be fixed. On the production side, we know that industrial food is bad for the environment, bad for the farmer, bad for the laborers in the fields and in processing and distribution, and for the reasons just cited, bad for eaters. And I think I will skip that because I can see I'm already waxing far too poetic. I will just tell you that one of the things that's important is to understand how consolidated and globally integrated the food system has become. There is starting to be some discussion, for example, of antitrust action against Monsanto. Monsanto controls the seeds globally for 96% of the soy, 80% of the corn, and 60% of the wheat. That seems to me like they've got us all by the throat. Now, I have been trying to get a response on email from Christine Varney, who strikes me as a very important person in this operation. She is President Obama's chief of the antitrust division in the Department of Justice. And if you are bored during this talk, we have another half an hour, please get out your little BlackBerry and email Christine Varney and ask her to step lively on Monsanto and antitrust. So I'm just going to skip all that. I'm going to assume you know most of it. If you don't, you can come back. So we can come back to it. Yuppie lettuce in context. What do I think I'm doing when I support alternative foods? Well, there are 5 primary features that seem common among the yuppie lettuce type foods, which ought to flesh out my understanding of yuppie lettuce. And one of them is that they are often produced and processed locally. But I think it's important to know that the claims and the assumptions about local food are very diverse and worth unpacking. What we hear about a lot, especially since Inconvenient Truth, is the importance of local in assaulting food miles. Research suggests that this may not be as gripping as has been originally suggested. For example, one of the things you can read now is that Sunkist just did a study of its production and distribution of oranges, and 60% of their greenhouse gases are produced by production and only 40% by distribution. And there are a lot of industry groups out there. There's a book called Just Food, for example, that's trying to tell you that locavores, the subtitle is How the Locavores Got It All Wrong and How We Need to Change to Eat Something in a global, anyway, it's called Just Food. But I don't think 40% of what Sunkist spends on its oranges is all that trivial. So you might want to hew to the food miles issue. But local has many other contexts of interpretation which I think are important. Local in an urban food context may simply mean available. There are plenty of places in my hometown, which is Berkeley, and in my home county, which is Alameda in California, where the only available food is liquor store food, gas station food, convenience store food, or fast food. And this refers to the problem of food deserts, which I'm sure you've all read something about. But the idea is that a lot of people cannot access fresh fruits and vegetables. And if you don't believe that, go into a liquor store and see what you can buy for food, or go into a convenience store, a gas station food, and see what you can get. There's a food activist in Chicago who says, with some irony, I think, that it's easier for people in her neighborhood to buy an AK-47 than it is to buy a tomato. So one element of local is available. Other ideas behind local are you support local producers, you aid local economies, you build face-to-face relationships, which is probably why I got trapped into buying 2 $7 butternut squash. Or it protects local open space and aesthetically attractive working landscapes. Now, we fight a lot about that at home. We are not convinced, especially in the southern part of the Bay Area, that wine grapes are an aesthetically pleasing working landscape. Once you've seen them blow off the mountaintop, level it with a laser and plant grapes, you might think that scenic Napa County is an industrial landscape, somewhat akin to Pittsburgh in 1910. But we can discuss that. Local can also imply that alternative foods have higher nutritional and product value. For example, if you go to a farmer's market, they might claim, or you might assume, that food has not deteriorated during shipping because it was harvested just hours ago. I used to think that was cute but caca, and it turns out that there is increasing evidence that sitting around in the cooler for 2 weeks does not improve the nutritional content of your vegetables. Other vegetables or meat producers might borrow a chapter from their colleagues in the wine industry and talk about the local terroir. And it's absolutely true that it's appropriate to promote the link between the local grass and the flavor of the meat, or the flavor of the milk, or the flavor of the cheese. Some of my best friends make cheese for Cowgirl Creamery. If you're lucky, you might get it in some specialty store around here. And you can taste the difference because it's made from Strauss milk, the first organic dairy west of the Mississippi. And the milk, the butter, and the cheese all change flavor throughout the year as the grass changes in its life cycle. Others, the reason I skipped the stuff on what's wrong with production is I knew I was going to come to a little bit more of it here under why I like alternative or yuppie chow better. Alternative foods claim to be authentically natural. Now, if you see natural on a label, I can promise you, you probably already know this, it means absolutely nothing. Natural has no meaning at all. Let me repeat. If somebody makes a claim that their product is natural, they are either hoping you'll believe them because you know them and they know you and it's true, or they're having you on. It means nothing. It's sort of like genuine certified Angus beef. How many of you have ever had certified Angus beef? You know what it means? They certify that the meat came from a cow with a black pelt. That's what it means. Okay. Authentically natural has two kinds of implications. First, it implies that the food may be, but if they're not claiming it's organic, you better wonder, that it's organic. It's free of synthetic chemicals and fertilizers. It's not genetically modified. And if you are trying to avoid supporting Monsanto, you better buy organic, because there is at least a chance that for some products you will not be getting genetically modified food products. Anything else, if it's not organic, no hope. If it is organic, some hope. But the way this, there's got to be a botanist in the room somewhere, the way this stuff blows in the wind, even organic food is at risk of becoming inorganic. And if anybody cares, I'd love to talk about the Monsanto case in Canada involving poor Percy Smizer. But I've got time limits, so I won't say it now. Somebody could ask. Obviously, there's several people in here who obviously know more than I do. But so authentically natural may mean free of synthetic chemicals, pesticides, and so on, GMOs, hormones, and antibiotics. Second, natural can be taken to mean that it is produced in a humane or environmentally sustainable manner. Water sensitive is big where I come from. I don't think you guys worry about water too much, do you? It sort of falls. It could mean that it's habitat sensitive or something like that. But there is a claim, an authentic basis when these claims are made, in addition to organic. The one that's most obvious, of course, is seasonality. You cannot go to a farmer's market in California any time between now and, March, and look for a tomato. It's authentic because you have to eat with the seasons, or at least that's the claim. Third, artisanal production methods suggest that foods are either produced by hand or through some kind of traditional method. And I used to think that was sort of silly too. Why do I care? How was it made, I like, you got a lot of this stuff around here, these authentic old buildings which you refurbish. You've got more of them than we do. You've been here a while longer. But it's not unexpected that a lot of these operations would be in a refurbished building. The Ferry Plaza Market which I am on the board of, is in a refurbished building. My friend the Cowgirls are in a refurbished barn, and so on. So there's a lot of aesthetics involved in that and a lot of cutesy. And obviously you can sell cutesy and keep your state economy afloat. But there are more important elements to this artisanal. I got into a fight with a friend the other day, whether it's artisanal or artisanal. Should we vote on that, or does anybody care? Artisanal? Artisanal, okay. Artisanal extends beyond the cutesy and the mere opposite to industrial. And it has to do with skills versus no skills. And one of the fundamental wrongs in industrial agriculture is that it is de-skilling. It is basically an attempt to turn farming, which is a combination of natural and industrial systems at its best, into an industrial system. And the way you do that is you divide the process, you contract it out, you substitute as much industrial inputs for human labor and human knowledge as you possibly can. And instead of waiting for your cow to get sick, and then knowing what to do about it, you just give everybody a prophylactic dose of antibiotics in everything they eat. So this is a good a good illustration of de-skilling. Industrial agriculture de-skills the farmer, it de-skills the farm worker, it de-skills the food processor, and that's just the start of it. In the production of food, you begin, and the French and the Italians are really neurotic about this, to the point of self-parody, but they have a point. When you lose traditional methods of producing food, you lose culture, and you lose your own personal history and your own sense of place. Worse, perhaps, in today's obesity climate, you lose the ability to cook food. And I was raised at a time when many mothers made bread. Now, of course, in California, it would be absurd to bake bread. You know, the bakery bread is so much better than Wonder Bread. But there are whole segments of our population who do not know how to cook. Either they have a $70,000 kitchen and they don't know how to turn on the lights, or they have no kitchen at all, and they have to eat out. They have to eat junk food, fast food, liquor store food, because they have been de-skilled out of being able to cook. And there is a reason why French fries are our favorite vegetable. It's because it's easy to cook. You just take it out of a bag. There are real important issues in the alternative approach that requires more skill. If food comes home less processed, if, for example, you confront a carrot rather than a bag of carrots that you can heat in boiling water, I mean, somebody's going to have to figure out what to do about it. And I have to tell you, the first time I got carrots with greens on the top, I tried to eat the greens. You know, one of the reasons, oh, never mind. Well, yes, one of the reasons potatoes were such a problem in Europe and were left to the Irish, which were worse than heathen and animals. How many of you are Irish? Well, one of the reasons that potatoes were so popular in Ireland and so unpopular everywhere else was because of the abject poverty of the working class and farmer peasant class in Ireland. And if you think about how you grow a potato, you don't need a plow, you don't need a horse, you just need a stick, and you don't need a pot or a pan to cook the potato. You stick it in the coals, and you don't need a fork to eat it. You pick it up like an apple. So this was the perfect food for the poor. It's also true that when the British came through marauding, as they frequently did, the potatoes were underground, and they were far more protected than wheat, which, you know, you can burn wheat. Now, where was I going? The French fry. Okay. If you come home with a potato rather than a French fry, so what happened? Back to the potatoes. So some Weisenheimer, I think it was Sir Walter Raleigh, brought back potatoes to Europe, and they said, this is going to be great. Well, nobody in Europe had ever eaten a tuber at the time, so they tried to eat the greens, and they killed a queen, and that's why they were left to the Irish. I can't remember which queen it was, but if you want to know, email me and I can tell you. So, but if food comes home less processed, if you can confront the carrot or the potato, or worse, I started doing this. If you come home with a chicken and it's got its feet on it and its heads on it, that's pretty traumatic. And I understand that some people actually kill chickens and eat them and take the feathers off, or take the feathers off first. But just who prepares these food becomes an issue in household and regional division of labor. Some people in some families have more time to cook than others, and it's okay to have to pluck the chicken. Other times, this becomes a gender issue, and it becomes a very important issue in relationship. Then there's the whole issue of whom do you eat with. I don't think until I graduated from high school I ever had 2 evenings in a row that I didn't eat with my parents. We sat down at the table and ate as a family. And I understand now that research has demonstrated, and as a scholar I can tell you if research has demonstrated it, it must be true. It's almost like reading in the newspaper. Even when families sit down together to eat, it is not at all unlikely that everybody at the table will be eating something different. That mom will be eating something that she made. Dad will be eating something that he brought home from the office. And the 2 kids will be eating pizza, which they defrosted in the microwave. So there's a whole lot of stuff that is going on that changes our relationships to each other as the food changes. So why is it hard to fix this? I mean, like I said, I buy my $7 butternut squash. I vote with my fork, which is what Michael Pollan and Alice Waters want us to do. Why is it very hard to change? Marion Nestle, have you all read Food Politics? If you haven't, you ought to read Food Politics by Marion Nestle, has pointed out that producers of global food spend upwards of $34 billion, I just read today it's up to $36 billion a year, reminding us about their accessible, convenient, tasty, processed foods, and lying to us about nutrition. And I don't have time to go into it, but if you have a taste for irony and just making yourself miserable, get on the web and read about the politics of the food pyramid. What nutritional scientists wanted to tell us about healthy eating, and what happened to these proposals in the Department of Agriculture before the food pyramid saw the light of day. And if you've been paying attention in the last 10 years, it borders on self-parody. But suffice it to say for now that nobody ever said it was important to eat less, and nobody ever tells you what a portion size is, which is one reason why we've increased by 50% our caloric intake since 1975. An irony is that industry resists labeling under many circumstances. So you can get into big fights. Is it mandatory that you label your product, this product contains genetically modified organisms? Or is it illegal to say this product contains no genetically modified organism? Well, you can fight for the importance of labeling or you can fight against it, but the fact is the consumer always loses. And you do not know what food contains GMOs. You do not know what chicken has antibiotics unless you go to some fancy schmancy store and so on. That said, the most amazing thing has happened in the last couple of weeks. How many of you have ever looked at a product and found it saying smart choice? Yeah. Well, this is a set of standards that were developed by such well-known doyens of human nutrition as Kellogg, Kraft, General Mills, And they wanted to give us easy to understand, at a glance guidance as to what to eat. So to qualify for the Smart Choice label, your products could not exceed certain levels of fat, cholesterol, sodium, and sugar. Ignoring all the processes which the nutrition profession has had in place since the 1920s for identifying nutritious foods, they came up with Smart Choice. And I don't want to shock any of you, but among those smart choices are Fruit Loops and Cracker Jacks. Why is it hard to change? Because they have $36 billion to market Fruit Loops as a health food, and all we've got is Michael Pollan. The good news is, if it doesn't say Smart Choice, don't have anything to do with it, because you know it's really dumb. This is something we were discussing at dinner. My second point, it's really complicated, but frequently, another reason why why is it hard to change these things? Sometimes what seems good is not. They lie on the boxes about their products, and they lie in the regulatory process. I'm a Republican. Why am I saying this? Well, it's gotten okay to call people liars. They got that son of a bitch from South Carolina campaigning for the dipshit in New Jersey. Oh, well. Regulation for public health typically has nothing to do with public health. It advantages big producers and burdens smaller ones. Now, that's a sweeping generalization, and I tried a million different ways to say this that I wasn't quite so sweeping, but that's a good place to start at. It's not always true, but it's a good place to start. The global food system is not only large in scale, but it is politically and economically powerful. And regulation exists primarily to control entry and to control competition. And an escalation of food safety requirements that sounds very much in the public interest, because we all want higher and higher standards for food safety. It ought to be non-controversial, but it has become non-controversial. We ought not to be misled, but we are. And so a lot of the stuff that people are now discussing as mandatory for food health and safety are problems which arise from industrialization and of the food system. And the industry's response is not to step back, to slow down, to clean up, but to industrialize further. Producer responses to contamination of food, for example, with feces, is not to slow the process down so the chicken or the beef can be cleaner, not to localize the process so that you can trace the chicken and figure out what's going on, but to defend chlorination of food as mandatory and lobby for irradiation of food. A poultry processing plant a manager explained to one of my co-authors that all the problems of salmonella contamination would disappear if we could simply irradiate the meat. Now, Marion Nestle, who wrote Food Politics, says, I view irradiation as a late-stage technofix, that is late in the production stage. It zaps dirty meat and lets the industry get away with producing dirty meat in the first place. Carol Tucker Foreman, who's head of the Consumers Federation of America, has a wonderful blurb on this, if you want to get on this, and she says, my concern is that I don't want a system that says you can have fecal matter all over it and then irradiate it. Irradiated poop won't make you sick, but it's still poop. Now, naturally, I wouldn't have called it poop, but then I'm reading a quote. I went to Brussels. We were talking about this at dinner, and then one of the first things I noticed was not the Grand Place, it was not the cathedrals. It was the fact that the chickens come without a diaper in the package. And I was trying to figure out why there was no diaper in the box, in the little package of chicken. And it turns out that they are not required to wash their chickens in chlorine, and so they don't need the little diety to take up the excess chlorine. And the United States on October 9th has entered a complaint to the WTO because the Europeans, snoots that they are, have banned American chlorine-washed chicken from their markets. And the decision was adopted in December 2008. All European countries support this. And then this is what the poor schmuck who's trying to go out there and explain this to the Americans says. Europe favors an integrated management of food safety, placing an emphasis on prevention rather than decontamination at the end of the chain. And he added, before envisioning possible decontamination by chlorine or by irradiation, we must be sure that chlorine and irradiation, the substances used, have no negative impact on health or the environment. Latest scientific opinions show that these guarantees are totally inadequate, and that the precautionary principle must prevail. Now, I'm not going to go into a long whoop-de-doop about the precautionary principle, but if you want to make yourself feel bad again, you can just get on a little website called pumphandle.com. And anybody got an idea what that refers to? Well, I'm sure you're all aware that cholera used to be a big problem. Well, it still is in some places. So there was this British doctor who looked at maps and said, it's got to be the water. So he went out into a neighborhood and took the handle off the pump, and the cholera epidemic ended almost overnight. But guess who was pissed off? It was the people that needed water. So the city government put the pump handle back on, and guess what happened? But the idea is that precaution probably makes more sense than trying to clean up afterwards. In the United States, I'm sure you remember the unfortunate Creekstone Farms case. Oh, I can see you all remember that one. Creekstone Farms is best known for its attempt to test all of its cows for BSE, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, better known for good reason as mad cow disease. And it was a big problem in England, and nobody would import British cows. Well, guess what? The Japanese don't want our beef either, and they have historically been the largest consumers of beef. So Creekstone Farms said, to hell with it, we're going to test every cow that goes out here. And they built the facility, and they trained the people, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture refused to sell them the kits they needed to test all the cows. And they said it would give American beef a bad name if somebody were testing for BSE. Go figure. I know a lot of people that say you can't do anything about farm labor until you fix immigration. I know a lot of people that say you can't do anything about food, health, and safety until we change how campaigns are financed. As long as agribusiness can buy legislatures and blind regulators, some people say there is little hope, and that voting with your fork won't help. I don't happen to agree. In a period when voting at the ballot box, especially if you're from Ohio or Florida or someplace like that, doesn't do you any good at all, you have to try all these things that are definitely less desirable than regulation enforced. So you have to have private labels, and you have to have win-win situations, and so on and so forth. But make no mistake about it, when anybody starts talking about the triple bottom line, I'm sure you've all heard that expression, which is environmental, social, and economic sustainability wins. So voting with your fork is second best, but until we decide that we want a system that voters can control, or until we decide we want to vote with our pitchfork, we're going to have to vote with our forks. And that is why I buy $7 butternut squash. I can afford it. And for those who can't, I feel obligated to make a market. That said, we should probably now turn to my last topic, which is food justice. You may remember this was not just about yuppie lettuce, it was about the relationship between yuppie lettuce and food justice. Well, I got to tell you, this is a very complicated topic. It is much easier to figure out why there's a deity in American chicken than there is to figure out about food justice. Food justice for whom matters hugely. For farmers, most of the community development programs between the Second World War and to the end of the 1990s, most of the justice work was done around sustaining small family farmers. And there are critics of this which say that Americans have this ideological and aesthetic love affair with small family farms. For some reason, they don't like those piles of manure that are 40 feet high on Interstate 5 in California. And that Americans focus all their attention on small family farmers. And I think that there is justification for a lot of people thinking the alpha and the omega of the justice issue is to protect small family farmers and keep small farmers on their land. And if you read Wendell Berry, you can get yourself all agitated about the glories of small family farming without ever remembering that the glory days of small family farming, the farms were kept going by slaves. I mean, our tradition is sort of not untainted. So the point I'm trying to make is that small family farmers are not the alpha and the omega. What justice might look like looks very different from the perspective of the farm worker. And in California, of course, we have almost no farmers. We don't even call them farmers. We call them growers. But the whole operation is so intensely capitalized that most of the people that are working on farms are laborers. And there's a big movement of justice people who don't want to, enshrine the small family farmer. And they're starting to say, why is there no health insurance for farm workers? You might ask your president that. I think it's a good question. Why are there no vacations for farm workers? Why aren't farm workers paid the minimum wage? Another really good, interesting question, which has to do with campaign finance reform. To which the farmers in my neighborhood respond legitimately, I haven't got health insurance. I can't afford to take a vacation. Why should my workers have more than I do when I'm taking the risks? And I got into this issue by looking at farm land close to cities and the need to protect it. And I'm very active in my local land trust, which is the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. And I have been consorting with persons who are from land trusts, fairly consistently. And I have come to believe, and Jane, you have 30 seconds when I'm done to rebut, maybe 15. I have come to believe that a lot of this stuff that goes down as protecting small family farmers and agricultural landscapes ought to be interpreted in the same context that we view the Jane Austen landscape when the rights are entailed away and you can lower the cost of perpetuating large land ownerships. I think protecting ag land without talking about a fuller range of justice issues is highly suspect. So if you're protecting land and you're not talking about a full complement of justice issues, I think we can call that, in the terms of my title, an indulgence. Now, food justice exists in a growing list of apparently similar terms: feeding the hungry, feeding the poor, food security, community food security, access to food, food deserts, and so on. Now, I just want to go briefly through this because I think it's another thing that ought to make you miserable as an American. Are there any people that are not Americans here? Good for you. Hang tough. Tell us why we shouldn't have deities in our chicken, for Christ's sake. So, food security is a term that moved forward in the hunger lexicon after the Russian wheat deal, which is sort of like the coming down of the wall for people that lived through it, the Berlin Wall. For those of you who don't remember that, I won't go into it. But food prices shot up all over the world. We had food riots and so on and so forth. So people started talking about food security. The Rome Declaration on Food Security, which is a UN game, reaffirms food security as a right to safe and nutritious, adequate food, and the right of everyone to be free from hunger. So, in some parts of the UN speak, food security is a right. The summit also noted that poverty is a major cause of food insecurity, and poverty eradication is critical to improved access to food. Now, that sounds like a no-brainer. You know, we've all read Emerita or we're going to tomorrow. So please pay attention when Arthur Daniels Midland gets on the telly, or God, they used to fund my favorite news program, and tells you that the reason people are hungry is because they don't have enough food, that there isn't enough food. No different than in the Irish potato famine. Pay attention when someone like Arthur Daniels Midland or the Gates Foundation, another major sinner in this area, says that we need to further food justice by empowering Monsanto to feed the world. It wasn't true during the Irish potato famine. It wasn't true during 1,000 years of famines in India, and it's probably not true now. It could be. Don't jump to it. But just when Arthur Daniel Midland says we're running out of food and we need genetically modified organisms and we need Roundup-ready crops, you cross your arms across your chest and, ask 5 or 10 really pointed questions. Pay attention, too, to the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is different from the Food Summit, definition of food security. They say food security exists when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs. Well, that's, I don't know how many of you read E.B. White, but the first lesson of E.B. White is avoid intransitive verbs. Food security exists when? And Peter Rossett from Food First argues that the term says nothing about where the food comes from or how it is produced. Food security exists and thus enables Washington to argue that importing cheap food from the U.S. is a better way for poor countries to achieve food security than to learn how to produce it themselves. The U.S. has always been an agribusiness server in international discourse on hunger. And these semantic finaglings about what's food security and what's food justice represent real disagreement. And the U.S. has never adopted a document or supported a position that says anything about a right to food. Well, I find that embarrassing. The more recent idea of food sovereignty is associated with Via Campesina, which is an international peasant organization, which defines food sovereignty as the right of people to define their own food in agriculture, to protect and regulate domestic agricultural production and trade in order to achieve sustainable development objectives, to determine the extent to which they want to be self-reliant, to restrict the dumping of products in their markets, to provide local fisheries-based communities priority in managing the use and the rights of aquatic resources. Food sovereignty does not negate trade, but rather it promotes the formulation of trade policies and practices that serve the rights of people to safe, healthy, ecologically sustainable production. They do not want cheap U.S. food, which is killing their own agriculture. Well, let me just stop with that. And say, okay. Well, I just want to say one thing about immigrants. I don't know how many of you watched President Obama's speech on health care, but I was particularly stunned when he, stood there with his teeth in his mouth. I mean, he's skinny. He doesn't have trouble with food the way I do. And he says, no undocumented worker will have health insurance. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of the people who work on food in this country, growing it, harvesting it, distributing it, processing it, serving it in a restaurant, are undocumented laborers. In whose interest is it that we should have no health care and no access to health care for undocumented laborers who are not only exploitable because they're undocumented, but are also handling the food that we eat? Think about that when you get in bed tonight. Do you really want 60 to 80% of people who handle the food that you eat to be denied health care? So that's a problem. So, did I do something wrong? Am I okay? Okay, so the last question I'll address very quickly. How are we going to tie yuppie lettuce to this complex subject of food justice? Well, first of all, food justice advocates, as I've researched them, are no less interested in safe, healthy food than I am. They seek an end to food deserts. They seek access to healthy foods to replace liquor store and foods and fast foods, and they are suffering far more than I. I have an aesthetic problem with my chin, with these, my aunt calls these my kimono muscles, and I have an aesthetic problem when my thighs bang together under the seat of my bicycle. The people who have not got access to safe and healthy food have a very demonstrably higher level of all the health caused disease, diabetes, heart attacks, blood problems, and so on and so forth. So how are we going to connect these difficult issues? And I thought I would close by taking the evolution of the relationship between food justice and yuppie lettuce through a timeline. And I don't know if you guys are even going to understand what I'm saying. So how many of you have heard of Alice Waters in Chez Panisse? Okay, Alice Waters is this foofy restaurant, runs a foofy restaurant in Berkeley, which is about as foofy as you can get. And I'll just go through the timeline. It's a very fancy restaurant. For many, many years, it was regarded as the best restaurant in the world. And I say that knowing full well that there are several people here who have dined in Europe. So let me take a very hard case. What could be yuppier lettuce than Alice Waters? It was, in fact, Alice Waters who invented yuppie lettuce. She brought seeds back from France, planted them, got friends to grow them in their gardens, and served them in her restaurants. And that became so hip and trendy that now you can buy bags of yuppie lettuce at Walmart, which I consider a trendsetter. So let's... It is interesting to follow this connection by following Alice. In the 1970s, Alice was a Francophile Julia Child's knockoff. She cared about French markets, shopping every day with her little straw basket, the fruits, the smells, the aromas, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go see Julie and Julie. You know who I'm talking about. Actually, go see Meryl Streep. Forget all those other people. It's a great movie. So Alice Waters began Chez Panisse in a burst of enthusiasm for French fresh marketing. In the 1980s, two things happened. One, she couldn't get the food she wanted to have the quality dishes that she wanted. And she began foraging. Like it used to be, you could take a bag of Meyer lemons, which you people don't, they're really good lemons. You probably don't have a Meyer lemon tree no. Okay, they're really good lemons. So you used to be able to take your bag of Meyer lemons, which of course grow in everybody's backyard and where I live, and sell them in the back door at Alice's restaurant. That's not Arlo Guthrie's Alice's, it's Alice Waters. So she began foraging and having her friends grow out these extraordinary products. And then her father came along and said, you're going to have to clean this up. No more drugs. You got to keep books, and let's go organic. So her father went all over the state of California and began developing organic supply chains and encouraging organic growers and putting their name on the menu and making them famous. So everybody had to have Cowgirl Creamery cheese and Marin Sun Farms beef. and she developed organic business by buying it, starting it and incubating it where it wasn't there, supporting it. And one of the things that you can hear, if you hear her speak, I hear her speak all the time because I have to go to all these meetings, and she gets a little irritable when people, accuse her of being foofy. And she said, or what she calls arugulence. And she says, I support 86 farms. What are you talking about? So, in the 1990s, she did something that's quite radical. We were talking about this afternoon. She had a child. And in the fullness of time, her child went to school. And she started eating school lunches. Well, Alice started talking about edible schoolyards. She's invested an enormous amount of her treasure in developing edible schoolyards. She became a major supporter of food to school, farm to school programs. She started a foundation which funds all this stuff, and she began reskilling, feeding, and teaching American youth how to deal with food. In the 2000s, the decade that I don't know this woman, but I see her all the time. She is a full-on food activist, every bit as famous as that lady who made the comments about AK-47s. I find her role as a celebrity chef sort of but she is using that celebrity to sell the idea of healthy food for school children. So where does this leave us? Yuppie organic lettuce and also milk is now available at Walmart. Industrial organic is a very big problem for people that thought organic was always going to mean face-to-face with your farmer friend. And there's a wonderful book called Organic Inc. by Samuel Fromartz, if you want to read that. But there is also a rich, deep dialogue about food. Talking about food, if you're from California, as Jane demonstrated to me the other day, if you're from California and you talk about food, you sound like a nitwit, and I think that's too bad. I do not have any 150-year-old balsamic vinegar. What we are starting to have nationally is a dialogue about food. What's in it? Who grew it? Where was it grown? These are not foofy questions. These are the essence of survival. We are starting to talk not about having a farm bill in which the people that decide about food for the next 5 years are all farmers from Iowa, like our Secretary of Agriculture. We are talking about having a food bill. So I think that dialogue is exciting because it unites urban and rural, and it unites us all in something that our survival is about. You can go out of here saying, what the hell am I going to do about global warming? Or, I really don't like what's happening to those people in that valley in Afghanistan. What can I do? And you can come up a little short, I think, a lot of the time. And that becomes an excuse for what Martin Luther called quietism. You say, I can't do anything, I'm too small. If I turn out my light bulbs, the polar ice caps are still going to melt. This is something you make choices about that are pivotal every day of your life. And you engage in it and you pay the costs. And if you're eating fast food, and you're a woman, your children are paying the costs because the eggs in your ovaries are already formed. And what's in those eggs has real consequences for your children and grandchildren, and it ain't pretty. So we have this dialogue that we can actually do something about. I would like to say we're going to march on Washington and change things, but I see who's the Secretary of Agriculture, and I see who picked him. And I therefore think that while it is only possible to vote with your fork, that it is appropriate to get involved and vote with your fork, because you're also voting with your body.